A lot of fantasy football owners were left shaking their heads in week 4. But what was even more difficult than looking at your lineup and seeing a whole bunch of single digit numbers was actually trying to predict quarterbacks. Heck, it was so difficult predicting quarterbacks in week 4 that it would be easier to predict which NBA star is going to be cursed next by the Kardashians. Let's jump into quarterbacks for week 5. What's up, Headliner Nation? Kyle coming back to you from the Draft.com studios with another episode of the Fantasy Headliners, talking about quarterbacks for Week 5. Who are we going to start? Who are we going to sit? But before we jump into Week 5, you know how we like to do it here. We got to rewind and talk about our performance from Week 4. Now, as I mentioned in the opening, Week 4 was a tough one for several positions. Now, Jake killed it on running backs. But we did have a little bit lower numbers than we would have liked at some other positions. Now, the percentage was a little bit lower that I would have liked on quarterbacks for hit and miss last week on this episode, but our overall accuracy ranking was awesome. So let's check this out real quick. Looking at hits and misses last week, and the one thing that I just want to remind you of is that a hit and a miss isn't based on their performance. It's based on what we said for last week. So if a quarterback, if we list him as a sit last week and he scores more than 18 points, then that'd be a miss because they should have been a start. Last week, only 53%, 16 out of 30 correct. But like I mentioned, even though our percentage was a little bit lower on hits and misses last week for the start sit show, it was a lot better for our accuracy ranking. So as of right now, I currently sit at number 38 overall on the season for Fantasy Pros Fantasy Football Accuracy. Looking at it here, a couple of things. So quarterbacks on the season, I'm 48th overall. Tight ends on the season, number 2 overall. If you watched the tight end episode, I did say that I would update you on those numbers real quick. And I just wanted to let you know that last week I finished number 1 overall in the tight end category. So again, even though we had some issues on start and sit, we still looked really good in our rankings. Last week, Jake and I both did very well. Our week 4 accuracy rankings over on Fantasy Pros, 32 overall for myself, 38 overall for Jake. So even though we did have a little bit of a lower percentage than we would have liked on the start sit shows, we did really well in the accuracy rankings, and that's what matters. Putting all this information together and giving you good, detailed information is what we need to do. We've been doing that so far. It's time to do it again for Week 5, though. So let's jump into it. Quarterbacks for Week 5, start and sit. First matchup of the week on Thursday Night Football, Los Angeles Rams at Seattle Seahawks. Russell Wilson, for sure a start. Go ahead and put him in your lineup. But for Jared Goff, maybe that one catches you a little off guard. However, Jared Goff has been wildly inconsistent this year. Here are his finishes each week through the first 4 weeks of the season. Quarterback 29, quarterback 11, quarterback 21, then quarterback 4. And part of that quarterback 4 ranking last week was just based on volume alone. I mean, when you give up 55 points to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, you're going to have to throw the ball a lot. I don't foresee that kind of a defensive performance this week in Seattle. Yes, it's a tough environment, but if this game is a lot closer, that volume will not be there for Jared Goff. So, with that being said, this Seattle defense is also better than Tampa Bay's. Tampa Bay's has played pretty well so far, but Seattle's defense is still better, in my opinion, on in a Thursday night game that typically is a little bit more of a difficult game for offenses, and on the road in one of, if not the most difficult environment to play in the NFL. So, Jared Goff is going to be a sit for me this week, and I'm going to look at some streaming options that potentially have a little bit higher upside for me in Week 5. When the Arizona Cardinals and Cincinnati Bengals get together this week, something's got to give because someone is winning their first game of the NFL season, and some rookie head coach, is going to get his first career NFL win after this game is all said and done. Or maybe not. Maybe it's going to end in a tie. But with that being said, let's talk about Kyler Murray and Andy Dalton. Now, Andy Dalton, even though coming off a very poor performance against the Pittsburgh Steelers on Monday Night Football on the road, he's going to be a start for me this week, and I'm actually feeling pretty good about his ceiling. The Cardinals defense is giving up 24.28 points per game to opposing quarterbacks, fantasy points, third most in the NFL. Cincinnati is giving up 18.61 points to opposing quarterbacks in fantasy points, 12th in the NFL. Overall, these team defenses are both giving up more than 27 points per game to opposing offenses. There's going to be more than enough offense to go around in this game. Andy Dalton, even though the volume will probably still be there this week, the quality of that volume will be a lot better, and he probably won't nearly have as many people in his face as he did last week against the Steelers. Both of these guys are good plays this week, and as I mentioned with Jared Goff, finding someone to stream over him, honestly, I would stream Andy Dalton over Jared Goff this week, and that will reflect in my rankings. Yes, Marcus Mariota balled out last week, but I highly doubt he's going to do the same thing this week against a very tough Buffalo Bills defense. And for the Bills, who's going to be at quarterback this week? Josh Allen got himself rocked last week against the New England Patriots. Some are calling it a dirty hit, some are not. I'll leave that up to you. But will he be ready to go for this week? We've heard some mixed reactions. Yes, no, we don't know for sure yet. That's why we're going to keep our eye on Barkley, who is the current backup for Josh Allen in Buffalo. So, what are we going to see from this game this week? Now, last week, Josh Allen was a sit for me. I thought it was a very tough matchup against the New England Patriots, and it turned out to be just that. I don't think anything is going to get easier this week, whoever the quarterback is, because it's Tennessee. Right now with Marcus Mariota, Buffalo is giving up only 10.75 points per game to opposing quarterbacks. That is the third fewest in the National Football League right now. And for the Bills quarterback situation, if Allen is ready, it's still a tough matchup because Tennessee to opposing quarterbacks in fantasy points, only 14.85 points. That is the 10th fewest. Now if Josh Allen starts, maybe he gets a little bit closer to that 18-point marker needed to be a start. If it's Barkley, though, no. We're going to go ahead and stay away from him. So keep an eye on that. We'll see what happens. But again, I think we can find some better streaming options in Week 5. Speaking of streaming options this week, Chase Daniels could end up falling into that category. And even though I think his ceiling might be a little bit limited, I think he hits the 18 points needed to be considered a start. On the flip side, Derek Carr is going to be facing an extremely tough Chicago defense that's only giving up 11.88 fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks right now, the fourth fewest in the National Football League. Now with Chase Daniels, he's getting a defense that's giving up the sixth most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks right now at 20.33. That's the Oakland Raiders. And as I mentioned, I might not see a ton of upside with Chase Daniels this week. I think he's a safe play because I definitely think he can hit those 18 points given the defense that he's going to be playing. However, if Chicago's defense is all over Oakland and they keep them from scoring, and Chicago does just enough, you could see a little bit more of the running game this week than you will see the passing game, especially if Chicago can get up a little bit higher and get themselves a nice cushion, a nice lead over Oakland. So, again, if you're going to try to stream Chase Daniels this week, I'm not against it. I think it could be a smart, safe play. However, I just don't see any upside there. So just limit your expectations somewhat. This matchup is going to be a ton of fun to watch this weekend as Tampa Bay heads into New Orleans for a divisional matchup. And Teddy Bridgewater, for the first time in my start-sit episodes, is going to be listed as a start. And Jameis Winston is going to find himself back in that category by catching a lot of people off guard. Both of these defenses are in the top 10 in terms of most fantasy points given up to opposing quarterbacks right now. Tampa Bay is giving up 20 points per game. New Orleans is giving up 24 points per game. Both of these guys have an extremely high ceiling. And quite honestly, I think we're going to see a lot of points in this matchup. Yes, both of these defenses are good and underrated. However, both of these defenses can also break very easily. They're very risky defenses. They could really have a good game or they could have an awful game. Tampa Bay's defense has looked good at times this year. I know they have a couple of weeks of back-to-back performances where they've given up a lot of points. But as we get into this week, again, they could show up. They might not show up. I think we're going to find a little bit of that even ground. Both of these teams could put up well over 20 points this week in the Superdome in New Orleans. So it's going to be a fun matchup. Put both of these quarterbacks in your lineup and feel confident about it. In this matchup, Minnesota at New York, both of the quarterbacks in this matchup are going to be sits for me. Kirk Cousins, the main reason that I'm going to be sitting him against a New York Giants defense that got pummeled and pushed around by Tampa Bay a couple of weeks ago, but last week against Washington looked much better, is the status of Stefon Diggs. Now, at the time of this recording, Diggs missed practice. He missed practice on Wednesday, and there's really no clue as to why. Right now, we're just hearing that he missed for non-injury related reasons. There's been some talk that he's asking for trades. There's been some talks that he's not happy with the offense right now. If that's the case, does he suit up on Sunday? Is he possibly traded for then? I don't think he's traded before then. But that's the reason I'm going to sit Kirk Cousins for right now, is just because of the uncertainty of Stefon Diggs. If they don't have him this week, and this is already a very low volume passing offense, to lose one of your best weapons on offense, it can make things difficult. So I'm not going to risk it with Kirk Cousins this week. Now for Daniel Jones, I have him as a sit. And he could possibly bounce back. He could. I want to play Daniel Jones this week. I really do. I think he could have a decent game. I'm just not going to run with it this week. I think you can find some better matchups. I think his floor will be okay. It's the ceiling that I'm really worried about. He looked really good 2 weeks ago. He looked decent last week, had a couple turnovers. What are we going to get this week against Minnesota? Again, it's one of those situations where, yes, he could come out and he could have a really big game. He could show out like he did a couple of weeks ago. But again, I don't think that ceiling is there. I think there's a floor, no ceiling. I'm going to look for this week. I'm going to be looking for some better options with higher ceilings instead of what Daniel Jones may offer. As we've been saying here on the channel, hashtag Falk no, because we are not going to be starting Luke Falk this week against the Philadelphia Eagles, who their pass defense hasn't been great. So the matchup is awesome for Falk, but I'm not going to risk it either. Philadelphia is coming off a very good win against the Green Bay Packers on Thursday Night Football last week. Aaron Rodgers really torched them, though. So did Devontae Adams. But I just can't trust this offense to do anything close to the same. What could end up happening by Philadelphia is they key in on Le'Veon Bell and say, we're going to shut down Le'Veon Bell and we're going to make Falk beat us. And I don't know if he can go out and do that. Now, on the flip side, Carson Wentz, we're going to continue to play him. He's the quarterback 5 right now. He's looked good so far. The one thing that I will say, all the passing yards haven't really been there. However, he's only thrown 2 interceptions. Last week, he didn't even get to 100 yards, but he threw 3 touchdowns because he played with some really short fields last week. So he's been pretty efficient with his passes. I say we continue to start him in our lineups. The quarterback 5, you typically don't sit. We're not going to do it this week either. Yeah, Pittsburgh was all over Cincinnati and Andy Dalton last week, but I don't see the same thing happening against Lamar Jackson this week. The one thing about Lamar Jackson, he's much more mobile than what Andy Dalton is. So if he does face some increased pressure, he has the legs to get out of the pocket and get down the field. So maybe we see a little bit more of that upside that Lamar Jackson possesses because he's going to run the ball a little bit more this week. We'll see, but he's the quarterback 1 in fantasy right now, and just like with Patrick Mahomes, you don't sit the quarterback 1 in fantasy. Now, with that being said, Mason Rudolph is also going to be a start for me this week. I like this offense. I liked what we saw against Cincinnati on Monday Night Football. Some of those wildcat formations really keeping the defense off balance. I think we see some of the same things again. And the one thing with Rudolph that I really liked is they would run these plays, okay? They would hand the ball off and just run it, or they would do these wildcat plays. They did some sweep plays. They do a few of those, and they have some success with it, and then all of a sudden Mason Rudolph goes over the top to Deontay Johnson for a touchdown. So that's what they could do again. Those defensive backs can creep. Rudolph has the arm then to beat them down the field and score a big-time touchdown. So same thing could happen this week against the Baltimore Ravens. I'm going to go ahead and put Rudolph in my lineup again this week. Another viable streaming option if your starting quarterback just doesn't have that great of a ceiling. Yep, I got a little bit of hate last week when I said New England and Buffalo, both are sits for me, Tom Brady and Josh Allen, because I think this is going to be a defensive battle. And lo and behold, ended up hitting the nail on the head with both of those calls last week. But that was last week. Tom Brady back into the start category this week against the Washington defense that just hasn't played well. So Is he gonna turn the volume back up again this week? Absolutely. This is gonna be a guy that's gonna be absolutely safe to play in week 5. On the flip side, Dwayne Haskins, we're not even considering him at this point. Absolutely not. Doesn't matter if it's a 2QB or Superflex League. We are not considering it. He did not look good last week, even though he'll end up being fine. I have no issues, Dwayne Haskins. I think long-term he's going to be a very good quarterback. But this season, and especially this week, I'm just not feeling it. Right now, New England is giving up 5.88 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. That is the lowest amount in the National Football League. It's going to be another tough contest for Dwayne Haskins this week. Go ahead and just leave him on the waivers. We'll take a look at him a little bit later in the season after he has a little bit more playing time under his belt. Okay, I'll admit it. I've been wrong. Minshew Mania has finally hit the Draft.com studios, and I will buy into him this week. Now, maybe you're saying, Kyle, why this week? This is a tougher matchup. Why are we going to buy into him now all of a sudden? Well, it's not like Minshew hasn't had tough opponents already. So far, Minshew has faced Denver, who has given up the 6th least fantasy points, or 6th fewest fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. He's faced Tennessee, who's given up the 10th fewest points per game to opposing quarterbacks. And he's faced Houston, who's giving up less than 18 points per game to opposing quarterbacks. So he's had some tough matchups, and he has played just fine. So I expect a lot of the same things this week against Carolina. Now with Kyle Allen, we're going to give Kyle Allen another shot. I listed him as a start last week. It didn't really turn out to be that route, but I'm going to give him another shot this week. Jacksonville's giving up 19 points per game. Now, Kyle Allen has not thrown a pick in 2 games yet, which is great to see, but he has 5 fumbles. So a little bit of a compliment sandwich here. So no interceptions. He has 5 fumbles. He's got to get that cleaned up, but he has a completion percentage over 70% right now. So a lot of that probably because of the dump off passes to Christian McCaffrey. But when you have Christian McCaffrey as a weapon, you utilize him as much as possible. Both of these guys are going to be good options for you this week. Feel free to deploy either of them. I think a lot of fantasy owners are feeling a little bit down about Deshaun Watson and Matt Ryan right now. And one of those reasons is because these guys haven't been putting up the gaudy numbers that we saw last year, but both of them have been fantasy viable, more than fantasy viable so far this season. So some of the hate towards these quarterbacks I haven't quite gotten yet because they've been good. They haven't been great, but they've been good. Right now, Watson is the quarterback 6. And Matt Ryan is the quarterback 7. So both of them are doing more than enough to be fantasy viable for your team. Go ahead and deploy either of these guys in what will probably be a very good offensive matchup, and we'll see what happens in week 5 for them. All right, so maybe you won't love the Phillip Rivers sit call against the Denver Broncos, but let me explain this one to you a little bit more in depth on why I am not going to be playing Phillip Rivers this week. Right now, Denver is giving up the 6th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. So their defense has been pretty good in stopping the pass. However, with the run game, they are giving up the 6th most fantasy points. They're giving up 27.95 fantasy points to opposing running backs right now, 6th most in the National Football League. You've got Melvin Gordon back. You've got Austin Eckler, who's been very good this season. I could see this turning into a matchup where Los Angeles is using the running back constantly this week. The big plays will be limited through the air. Keenan Allen, I don't expect to have a huge week. Phillip Rivers, I don't expect to have a huge week. If anyone has a huge week, it's going to be those running backs. Now for Joe Flacco, Los Angeles is giving up 16.66 fantasy points per game. Flacco's only scoring 15 points per game average right now throughout the season. He's the quarterback 20. There just isn't nearly enough upside. Flacco is probably not going to be a start for me anytime soon unless the matchup is a juicy one. Dak and Aaron Rodgers in what figures to be one of the better matchups in Week 5 are both going to be starts for me. I think both Green Bay and Dallas, their defenses are extremely underrated. Yes, Green Bay did give up quite a few points to the Eagles last week, but again, they made some mistakes and gave them a really short field, which in turn led to some more points. This week, these two quarterbacks, I expect them to have good weeks, although their ceilings might be limited a little bit. So I'm not expecting huge performances, but both of these guys have more than enough opportunities to throw for a couple of touchdowns, at least get close to 300 yards, if not over. Both of them will hit 18 points this week and will be solid starts for you. Andrew Luck, who? Well, Jacoby Brissett's been doing his best this year to help Indianapolis Colts fans forget about their previous quarterback. Now, no one's forgetting about Andrew Luck anytime soon, but Jacoby Brissett has been really good so far this season. After Andrew Luck retired on Twitter, I did send out a tweet saying, hey, I don't think Indianapolis is going to be that hurt by losing Luck this year. Their defense should be decently solid. They should have a really good run game, a really good offensive line, and Brissett will do just enough. Well, Brissett's been doing even more than just enough. Right now, he's tied for the league lead in touchdown passes. Kansas City is giving up quite a few points per game right now to opposing quarterbacks. Matthew Stafford had a great week last week against them. Jacoby Brissett is going to be a start for me this week. He should easily hit that 18-point threshold that we need to have him listed as a start. And for Patrick Mahomes, a lot of people are shocked that he didn't throw for any touchdown passes last week against Detroit. Do you honestly think he's going to go back-to-back weeks without throwing for touchdowns? Not happening. Expect Patrick Mahomes to bounce back to being himself at home. Absolutely will happen. Go ahead and toss him out there. More than likely, he's going to be a top 3 quarterback, if not right back at my QB1 position this week. On Monday Night Football in San Francisco, yes, absolutely, these two quarterbacks could be limited because the defenses for these two teams have been playing pretty well. Cleveland obviously has needed to make some adjustments. San Francisco's looked really good so far, still undefeated. But the main thing with these quarterbacks, Jimmy Garoppolo is coming off the bye and gets the extra day, while Baker Mayfield gets an extra day as well, playing on Monday night. And Mayfield looked good last week against the Baltimore Ravens. So both of these guys, with the extra rest and the extra prep time, I'm going to have them as starts on Monday Night Football. Should be another great game, and both of these guys should be solid contributions to your fantasy football lineup. Ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. Start and sit for week 5 of the fantasy football season. Talking quarterbacks. And keep your eyes out. We'll be dropping our rankings videos as well. So if anything changes between now and kickoff, we'll be dropping those rankings videos. So you'll absolutely get the most updated information as possible. And if you have questions about, well, I've got 2 quarterbacks that I could start, who should I start? Those rankings episodes will also help take care of that if we can't get to your questions in time. But don't forget, Headliner Nation, Saturday nights, as always, we are live for the Fantasy Headliners at 9 Eastern time right here on YouTube. Set your calendars. Don't forget about that. More importantly, though, hit that notification bell at the bottom of the channel. If you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe and hit that notification. If you have subscribed and you haven't alerted yourself, do that as well. Anytime we go live, anytime we drop a new video, you're going to find out about it right away, and then you can jump in and take a look and be one of the first to find out. Hit the like button as well, and also feel free to leave any comments below if you've got any questions or if you just disagreed on something. We love to talk football with everyone, and we'd like to respond as much as we possibly can. The one thing that we ask, just be courteous. That's the only thing we want you to do in the comments. Thanks so much, Headliner Nation. I'll catch you on the next episode. Have a good one.